Okay, so we're moving into the last part of our presentation, which is about guiding principles for development. We've covered all the information. Now we're moving into more of the issues that are different ways to look at floodplain development, the different constraints and things to weigh, at least the things that I do, so it can help deepen your conversation moving forward. These guiding principles I look at are resiliency, climate justice, maintenance, and ecosystems. There are likely more. You can come up with more if you'd like. These are just the 4 that stand out for me. So I want to share them with you. So the resiliency is the ability to recover quickly or to spring back. So this is a picture of a natural undeveloped floodplain. In a natural floodplain, there's plenty of room for the water to move. Where you see the water, what we call the floodway. There's room for a flood, there's habitat, sediment, and mineral transport. The issue with this is that there's decreased developable land. So there's plenty of room for the water to move, but there isn't anywhere to build. So on the flip side, in a developed floodplain, it looks more like this. It's linear. There's room for a flood. This would hold a 100-year flood. So it does the job, and development can happen right up to it. However, habitat is limited and it's not very natural or aesthetically pleasing. So these are the 2 ends of the spectrum. A nice thing in the middle would be, as an example, this is Boulder Creek. So this has a nice natural flow to it. It is an engineered channel, but it does not hold the entirety of the 100-year flood. So something to think about. How do you, in the face of climate change, and more frequent and or more intense flooding, how do we want to preserve the integrity of our river systems in our community? So the next guiding principle is called climate justice. So this means that the intention of the FEMA regulations, they are written for life safety, of course, but also they are written from the perspective of property ownership. But there are a lot of people that live in the floodplain or use the floodplain that do not own property. So renters is a great example. People that are homeless or without a home. Children, elderly, disabled persons. They might own a home, but they also might have trouble or be at risk because they would need assistance in being removed from that home in the case of a flood emergency. So the intention is good with the FEMA regulations, but those making the decisions aren't always included. Those making decisions aren't always including those who aren't part of the decision. So another way to look at this is this quote by Joyce Coffey, who is writes a bunch of articles about climate justice particularly, and she says, the poor are more likely to live in rental housing, may not be able to afford insurance, and often hold jobs that don't tolerate unexpected absences from work. In short, the poor are less able to insulate themselves from harm. By disproportionately affecting the poorest people in communities, climate disasters deepen poverty and widen inequality. I think this actually holds true given the current global crisis we're in as well with the COVID-19 pandemic. The poor are less able to insulate themselves. They can't hold the jobs that their jobs don't tolerate unexpected absences. So it widens this gap, and that also happens in a flood. It's just something to think about. So one of the guiding principles to think about is how do we protect the parts of our community who are vulnerable and don't always have a voice. A third guiding principle is maintenance. This is the least sexy of all the principles, but when you improve a floodplain, when you install these, like this is a bridge installation where they put in a bridge and it opened up the channel and then could hold the 100-year floodplain, somebody has to maintain that. Someone has to go in there with a bulldozer and remove sediment, trim trees, remove root balls, otherwise the creek doesn't flow in the way that it was engineered. So all of that maintenance takes time, money, people, and most importantly, it takes access. So here's another, this is a blurry picture, but you can see on the left, this is the bike path and it's lovely, but there's no way to get to the creek. So on the right, you could potentially drive a bulldozer down from the parking lot on the right-hand side, but let's say it was back to that concrete channel in one of our very first slides, how do you get down there and maintain it and access it to keep it free-flowing. So another thing to think about as a guiding principle is how do you maintain the creek, whether it's a natural flowing creek or there's going to be underpasses and bridges and culverts. How are people going to get in there to keep it clear? The last guiding principle to think about is the ecosystem. So the ecosystem goes underground. There's all the bugs and the critters and the things, the worms, and it also extends down a corridor. The biodiversity the biodiversity on the Front Range, a large portion of it lives in the riparian areas, and the riparian areas are primarily along the creeks and in the floodplain. So these corridors are helpful and useful for the ecosystem to thrive because animals and fish and bugs, they all move based on food, water, temperature. They don't see parcel lines, and they don't care if there's a fence there or not. They need room to move around and keep the ecosystem thriving. So restricting those corridors or urbanizing them can have an impact. So it's another guiding principle to think about protecting the vulnerable ecosystems. So all of these guiding principles have pros and cons. They're things to weigh against each other. If we have a natural river system, it provides less area for housing, and we're not maybe looking out for some of our more vulnerable population in our community. If we protect the vulnerable population, maybe we enhance development. That might mean we have to look at different infrastructure and how is that maintained, and is that going to have impact on the vulnerable ecosystem. So these are all things that just to think about and weighing what's important to you, especially as you look into the future of your subcommunity, of our subcommunity, to the 2050 timeframe. When I think about 2050, Magnus will be 30. Hopefully he'll be moved out of my house, self-sufficient, but he'll be an adult with maybe children of his own and a job. And what kind of subcommunity, what do you want the community to look like for someone that's a child now but will be an adult then? So just all these things to think about. Thank you for listening to the presentation and these videos. I hope they were useful and beneficial to you. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. There's Magnus again. I told you he would make a couple of entrances. This is my email address at work. Feel free to email me with any questions, and I'll also be available for phone calls and emails. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day.